All right. I am the self-proclaimed gem drafter, James Newton. People call me Newts for short. That's my nickname. I'm here with 2/3 of the Dynasty Theory podcast, John Bauer at the Bauer Club and Dan LaMagna at FF Coach Dan. RIP Mitch. You were great, man. Just kidding. Mitch is still alive. He's just West Coast and probably at work still. John does some writing for Fantasy Pros. Dan is a former football coach, right?
Yes, sir.
And an expert. Sorry, I psyched you out there. And an expert at spotting dysfunction. How's it going? I'm going to kick it to Dan first. How's it going?
Man, it's going great. You know, it's great to be talking fantasy football. Enter another show here. John's working Mitch and I to the bone. Mitch is just essential to the state of Utah, so unfortunately we don't have him today. But thanks for having me on, man. I love to talk shop with you here.
I appreciate that you're here, Dan. How's it going, John?
Oh, awesome. And I think at this point, Dan's sick of me. This is 3 days in a row that we've had a pod together. And yeah, every time we do an earlier show, because Mitch is out in Utah, he's stuck at work, but he does send his best.
Oh, Dan loves you, John.
It's getting bad. You know, I see my wife and I say, hey, Michelle, it's 3 days in a row. It's rough. But
that's because I'm drinking all those Trulies on camera.
Right.
I wanted to talk about something off script to start. Just real quick hitter here. My 2021 pick trading policy. I was thinking about that today, and my previous stance was I want to trade 2021 picks because of the uncertainty with the college season this year for proven young talent like these rookies, because I think this class is so deep, or even guys from 2019, like the ones that broke out big time, like AJ Brown, Deebo Samuel, guys like that. Maybe Deebo's a little bit scary with the foot injury, but back on topic, I was really thinking today about targeting 2021 picks on teams that don't have a lot of depth in case, like, what if two of your guys get coronavirus and they miss 2 weeks, and then you get those guys back and someone else on your team gets it and you just have a string of bad luck? What does that fire off in your guys' brains?
Now, a few weeks ago, we talked about this and we talked about contingency plans. And one thing that Dan and Mitch disagreed on, and I just kind of sat back and watched it happen, but Mitch said that he was actively looking to move 2021 picks. Now, I will do that if the price is right. As I always say on Dynasty Theory, it's price dependent. But the way everything's shaping up and different information that's been provided through different sources, I'm okay acquiring the 2021 picks, especially the first. I think that's still going to be a strong first round rookie class. But again, if the price is right, I'll move them. If the price is right, I'll acquire them. And one example that Mitch brought up, he said that he would be okay moving a 2021 first for Adam Thielen. Now, even though I really like Adam Thielen here in 2020, and that's indicative in our 2020 projections, I don't think that's a move that I would make right now, just because we know at this point next year that 2021 first, well, up until the rookie draft, is going to have tremendous value. And Adam Thielen, you know, just with how unpredictable fantasy is in general, but especially this year, those 2021 picks, their value is going to be more insulated than a lot of these players. So again, I can go either way, but I'm not looking to dump my picks just for the sake of dumping them. So
yeah, I think it's a good analysis there. I'm a little more wishy-washy. So well said there, John. I love trading picks in general. I'm just a little more skeptical this time. I hate to give up future young talent for, you know, an aging veteran just to have that depth. So I'm a little more intrigued to obtain the picks than usual. Although today, again, depending on what's out there, I traded a first round pick for Cam Newton. And just, you know, we were talking about Cam last night with Ian Hartitz, and he's just kind of moving up my ranks, and it's a league that the quarterback scoring is pretty big. So I was thrilled to get Cam. I still have another first round pick in that league. And I think it depends with how your roster's set up. I'm very high on Trevor Lawrence. You know, we haven't really looked that far ahead, John, and started talking about next year's rookies. But I think when we do get to that point and we, you know, look at the rookie quarterbacks that have come out each year, I am as high on Lawrence as any rookie that's come out in the last few years. So if I could save a first or have a chance to get him, that is a draft pick I want.
There's definitely some great talent at the top of next year. And, you know, the wheels just started turning for me about, you know, what if any first round pick is pretty random next year because of the coronavirus. That's just what I was thinking about today. So I wanted to mention it to you guys and just get some of your thoughts. But
especially if it's a deeper league. Last point on that, Newts, we're in a 14-team Superflex league together. Dan, you and I were in 14 and 16-team Superflex leagues together. Typically in those leagues, in a normal regular season, one injury really could cost you a playoff push or a title run. And now, let's say, just like you said, Newts, they lose 2, 3, 4 players. That first is going to be looking very attractive. So I love the idea, especially in deeper leagues, targeting those picks, because it is going to be a really random season. I mean, the whole year has been random up to this point. We have these, what are they, the Killer Bees or the Fighter Hornets or whatever the hell they were earlier this year. This has been such a crazy year, and I expect it to continue.
I think another point to think about too is those big time conferences that are going to play now, they're going to get that ample rest time and be ready for the next NFL season. The smaller conferences or that are limiting, or if they're pushing football back into the spring, if they're talented enough, I think they're going to sit out and prepare for the NFL draft. If they're not, they're going to play. And then that's a guy I'd be concerned about, because I don't see how you play a college football season in the spring and then turn it around in a couple months to get ready for an NFL season. Wow, will that take its toll on a body? So I think it depends who and where they are, and we have to monitor that closely.
Some great thoughts there. I appreciate that. I really like both of those insights on, whatever is going to happen with this year. Hopefully we get a full season, but let's head right into, fingers crossed, let's head right into our main event, which is titled by me, Untrustworthy Wide Receivers. We're going to be counting them down from 3 to 1. Maybe you don't feel, super strong about, hating your 1 versus your 3, but you just have some off feelings about each of these guys. But without me rambling any further, let's jump into it. Let's start with John with his number 3.
Now, these 3 guys, and surprise, surprise, on Dynasty Theory, we focus on the dynasty aspect. But for the purpose of this, what you tasked us with, I wanted to look at your, redraft purposes. So my number 3 wide receiver here that I'm a little skeptical about, and I saw that in our projections when we put them together, that, it's DK Metcalf. So ADP wide receiver 21, we have him coming in around wide receiver 29 in our projections that Mitch and I put together. And you look at where he's going, and I just used Fantasy Pros ADP to keep it pretty simple, but David Montgomery's going right there. And if I have the choice between a running back that could potentially get 275, 280 touches at that point in the draft, that's the direction I'm going to go. So for me, I think Tyler Lockett is still going to be that first option there. He was a little banged up last year, but people forget, and they forget very quickly, that when he was healthy, he was the go-to receiver. And he got banged up, I think it was that San Francisco game, week 10. And then after that, you would think that DK Metcalf really would have separated himself. He didn't. So he had 46 targets the final 7 weeks, 54 targets in the first 9 games. So he went from 6 targets to 7 targets per game. And you look at his snap count, it drastically increased over that last stretch. So one thing that I always talk about in Dynasty Theory, one measurable metric that I like, is yards per route run. He actually declined as the season progressed. First 9 games, 1.8 yards per route run. Last 7 games, 1.54 yards per route run. I know he's a physical monster. I'm not doubting that. I know a lot of people, they look at the 3 cone, and that's one reason they wanted to knock him. I'm not even knocking him for that. I don't think there's enough volume in that offense unless Chris Carson goes down, which it's a possibility, but we're hoping for a full season there. So I don't know if we ever really get the chance to see Russell Wilson get unleashed. So for me, DK Metcalf, he's a guy here in 2020 I'm lower on in the consensus.
I can see all those points you made. Just to play a little bit of devil's advocate, I got a couple things here for DK Metcalf. Although, the passing attempts are low, bottom third of the league in pass attempts for Russell Wilson, he has been a super consistent quarterback from a season-long standpoint over 8 seasons, averaging 28 passing touchdowns and 3,700 passing yards. Now, I know that's not the sexy, 2018 Ben Roethlisberger or I think the year after that, Patrick Mahomes type season or the Peyton Manning type season, but he's so efficient and so consistent. And I think why people are so down on Russell Wilson is because they're usually a winning team. And I typically think they're more conservative towards the end of the season, which is running the ball. And in the last couple seasons, they've been running the ball a lot more. But to me, that running back situation is kind of a mess with Carson recovering from the fractured hip and Hyde not being anything super special. Rashad Penny's kind of a wild card. Dallas, not to get too long-winded here, DJ Dallas is intriguing, but not a lot working in his favor. Late fourth-round pick, not strong in athletic testing. So I think that this team has a chance to be hyper-efficient, which is going to be kind of a boomer bust type player. But the boom, if he's, if you're a really good, to look at it from a dynasty perspective, if he's like if you're a stacked team and he's your wide receiver 3, the boom could be amazing from week to week for DK Metcalf.
And I love DK in dynasty. I'm not doubting that, but and I don't want to come across as saying these guys have to be super efficient and productive in year one, because especially with wide receivers, when we look at the tight end position, it takes a little bit more time to develop. And we as dynasty and, even redraft players need to show that patience. But as the season progressed, again, the first 9 games, he was wide receiver 34 with 12.5 PPR points per game. That last stretch when Tyler Lockett was not healthy, he dropped to wide receiver 47 during that stretch, and it was only 10.6 PPR points per game. That's something that I'm not super interested in, and I love targeting the wide receivers a little bit later. But again, if I can get a player like David Montgomery that I think can put up those just below workhorse numbers, that's just the direction I want to go. In DK Metcalf, I just can't do it. I understand Russell Wilson is super efficient. We just talked about that last night on Dynasty Theory. But it's not going to make up enough for the lack of expected target share for Metcalf.
I think this is one where I'm in between with you there, John. I definitely see the point. If I'm looking to compete this year, I don't know if Seattle gained enough to, have free Russ Wilson there between, adding Philip Dorsett and Greg Olsen. I don't know if that's enough to let the reins loose. The only thing I would be concerned about, he's a specimen. So I think I agree with you by where he's getting drafted. I think someone's probably going to take him before me. But we are talking dynasty, and in the back of my head, we were talking about AJ Brown last night. And DK,
I was talking just redraft. I said for 2020 alone.
Gotcha. Yeah, 2020 alone, based on where he's going, I think he takes a step this year, but not the step we're going to see in year 3 and year 4. So with that, I agree.
From some data that I pulled, qualifying receivers with 40 or more receptions, DK Metcalf was actually 88th in catch rate last year. 58% catch rate. So, you could read that however you want. Maybe that's terrible to you, or maybe you think, oh, he has a chance to improve because he only has a one season sample size. And then that would mean he would obviously score more fantasy points based on his market share, which is actually last year only 2% less than Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett, 21.3, and DK Metcalf, 19.3. The
only thing for me, I think that's a little skewed just because Tyler Lockett did get banged up a little bit there towards the middle to the end of the season. But you mentioned the reception percentage. That doesn't really concern me because DK Metcalf, you look at guys with the bigger average depth of target and more air yards. And you look at a player like Kenny Golladay, he has a really low catch percentage, but that's somebody that I absolutely love just because of the way that offense is built. So that's not something that I'm really knocking him for, but it's more just the overall expected amount of targets that are going to be available in that offense.
For sure. Any other thoughts on DK Metcalf? Otherwise, we could jump into someone else's number 3. I think that's how I want to do it. Dan, or if you want me to go, Dan, I can go ahead.
I'm up for anything, buddy. This is your show. I'll follow your lead right now.
All right, I'll name my number 3 guy who was previously mentioned on this podcast already. It's Adam Thielen, and I'm calling for it in redraft and in dynasty because last year, he was injured after kind of a good start to the season, but he really had one big blow-up game against the New York Giants, who I think pretty much had a non-existent secondary last year. Like I said, he only played 7 games to start the season, And he came back in weeks 15 and 16, which gave you some hope, but really didn't do anything for you those weeks at all. So kind of let you down. He's getting up to the age 30. It's a run-heavy team, 4th in rushing attempts last year, 3rd from last in passing attempts, kind of middle of the pack in passing yards and touchdowns. And I'm a little bit concerned if Dalvin Cook doesn't play that Madison's not I think Madison's a good player. I really liked him coming out of college, but I don't think he's a special transcendent player that's going to command the respect of the defense. And with Diggs gone, I think there's just going to be a lot of focus on Thielen as well, even if he does stay healthy, and especially if Cooks isn't in there. One other point to add, or maybe a few here, defense, for the Vikings, a little bit suspect in the secondary. That could lead to some narratives towards them not having much time of possession, which is obviously less time on the field and less opportunity for Adam Thielen. And at his ADP, in Dynasty, especially 5th, 5th round in 1 QB I looked at today, and 6th round in Superflex. No thanks. I don't know if this is accurate, but according to DLF, he's going ahead of Diggs, McLaurin, Chark, Judy, Debo, Tyler Boyd. Give me all those guys over Thielen in Dynasty. And in redraft, I actually did a couple mock drafts yesterday, and he was going in the middle of the 3rd round ahead of Le'Veon Bell, Allen Robinson, Juju, Amari Cooper. That's just, I would rather have all those guys than Adam Thielen. One question for you guys before I stop my rant here. Do you know how many age 30 wide receivers had over 1,000 yards last year?
I'm going to pull it out of my butt here. I'm going to say 2.
Nailed it. It was
it really?
Yeah, Julio Jones and Julian Edelman, and both those guys had over 150 targets. I know Thielen had over 150 targets 2 years ago, but that's, unheard of for most players. That's my points against Adam Thielen.
I still go ahead, Dan.
I know for Dynasty, the price has to be right. I think if I'm a contending team and he could give me a boost and I could get him at the right price, I like him. For redraft, I love him. And I think the one point you said there, Newt, that stood out to me that I will be interested to watch is how soon does Justin Jefferson pick up that offense? Does Irv Smith take that next step? Could they take some pressure off and open up that offense, especially if Dalvin Cook does hold out, which is another good point. If Cook holds out, if Jefferson has struggles as a rookie because he missed, we didn't have that training camp time. It does take rookies time to develop. Maybe Irv Smith needed that extra camp time. So then maybe they're double cover Thielen and making life tough on the Minnesota Vikings. So that would be a concern, maybe at least in the beginning of the season. But we've talked about him on our show as far as volume and opportunity. If Jefferson does have the talent, Irv Smith takes that next jump, and as long as they have Dalvin Cook, even if Madison's just for a couple weeks, I think they'll be all right. Mike Zimmer will figure out the defensive piece there. You got a heck of a defensive coordinator in Minnesota. So I think it's just how the talent evolves around him.
I actually see them they were extremely conservative and run heavy last year. Everybody knows that. But I actually expect them to be a little bit more pass friendly here in 2020. I don't think it's going to be a complete shift and they're not going to flip the script because we know what Mike Zimmer wants to do. They got rid of John DeFilippo because they were throwing the ball too much. So it's not going to get to that level, but I think we're going to see more passing attempts. And with Diggs gone and the other things that Dan had brought up with the shortened offseason, Jefferson, Irv Smith, the younger talent around him, barring an injury, I love Adam Thielen this year. And it's somebody that I really have my eye on in 2020 redraft. And then in Dynasty, we're going to get that age discount in a lot of situations. But like Dan said, in Dynasty, if you're not getting that age discount, I'm not going out and actively looking to buy him. But if there's somebody that is not a contender and they're looking to push these older assets, sure, if I can get him for the right price.
It's great. I love that we have different takes on these guys because that's what people need to hear and they need to decide for themselves. Dan, you want to, not to cut Adam Thielen short, but Dan, do you want to throw out your next guy here, your number 3?
Yeah, I might flop my order here. I don't know if we're doing like our worst up to our best, but I'm going to start with Devontae Parker, if that's all right.
Okay, go for it.
The 3 guys I selected. And if you listen to Dynasty Theory, you know, John, Mitch, and I, we have different philosophies. John and Mitch are very analytical statistics. They're doing a great job with their projections, you know, mapping out, you know, where they think guys are going to land. I'm more watching game film. We talked about the dysfunction. I like to identify. I like looking at their current situations. And the three guys I picked are really based around situation and health. You know, there's something dysfunctional there, or there's some kind of health concern where when I look at their ADP and who's getting drafted around them, that's where my concerns come in. So, you know, Devontae Parker had an excellent year last year, not taking anything away from him there. You know, I think he's a talented player, but I am concerned that it's only a 1-year sample. You know, where has that been all these years? And when you look at his ADP, and let me just pull him back up here, where he is going, there are a lot of guys around him that I would much rather have. So moving as fast as Fantasy Pros wants to go here there. Somehow I clicked off the screen. All right, here we go. So Devontae Parker's ADP is 32, right after my boy Marquise Brown, who I may talk about later. And then behind him is Gallup, Thielen, who we just talked about, the young talent, Ruggs, Jefferson, N'Keal Harry, who I think can make a second-year jump, Mike Williams, who has potential. If we're talking veterans, I'd rather have T.Y. Hilton than Devontae Parker. My boy McCole Hardman, and I know you like him there too, Newt. So there's just so many guys that, you know, what Preston Williams comes back and he's healthy. We saw with both of them on the field, Parker's production wasn't as good as when it was just him alone. The running game gets a little bit better this year. I think there's some receivers there that could take a small jump. They're kind of no-name guys, but the Jakeem Grants and Albert Wilsons, if they're healthy, I can see him spreading the ball around. Gesicki might take a little jump. I'm concerned and have trouble with trust with Parker being my number one or a top receiver, knowing I only have a 1-year sample, and I could see some regression and some other guys stepping up. So he would be number 3 on my list of guys that I would not trust and would rather draft some guys around him.
I feel exactly the same way, Dan. I mean, it's a high passing volume offense, but there might be a QB change coming mid-season. Well, I'm with you on Preston Williams. I personally think Preston Williams, just as a football player, is better than Devontae Parker. That might be a hot take to some people because Devontae Parker is obviously the better athlete from an athletic testing standpoint. But like you had said for Parker, the production was down when Preston Williams was on the field, only averaged 10.2 PPR fantasy points per game with Preston Williams on the field. So I just never liked Parker either. Came into the league eating fast food and drinking Mountain Dew. I just don't trust him.
Yeah, you know, Preston Williams, that poor guy, you know, I hope he has a break, and then because he seemed to really get life together. He projected as a high draft pick if it wasn't for, you know, the issues he had in college leading up to there. But he showed his work ethic, he showed his talent, and then he gets this, you know, really tough injury. But we've seen guys bounce back from that injuries. He's young, the talent's there. You know, again, Devontae Parker, for the owners out there, not here saying he's a bad pick or a bad player. You know, I watched him on film too. He had some good games. He made some nice catches with Fitzmagic there. Just don't like him compared to the other guys at that ADP.
For sure. Any thoughts on Devontae Parker, JB?
Well, since I spent about 3 hours talking about DK Metcalf, I'm trying to condense my thoughts here. But real quick on Devontae Parker, yeah, there's the concern, and I'm on board with Dan and you, Newts. There's the concern that at some point during the season, they do switch to Tua. There's the concern that Chan Gailey is now the offensive coordinator. And yes, he gravitated more towards using the wide receivers previously, but that was a few years ago. Is he going to stick with that? We don't know. And then also, just like Dan said, this is a team that barely ran the ball last year because they didn't have any viable options. We like Jordan Howard. We like Matt Breida. And I think both of them together, they can give them some decent production out of that backfield. So for me, I think there's a few things going against Devontae Parker. The 1-year sample size, you know, in year 5 that we saw, I'm not ready to trust him just yet.
Yep. Very good points. John, do you want to jump in with your number 2? I am listening. I have to break up a literal cat fight real quick, but I am listening.
All right, sounds good. So while Newts is out there playing cat wrangler, breaking up a fight, my guy, it's Courtland Sutton. And Dan, you can see I kind of have a theme here. All 3 of my guys that I'm going to talk about, they're the Twitter darlings. They're the younger receivers. And so Cortland Sutton, I just don't know, even though I do like Drew Lock a lot and I like what they're doing there, but I think it's going to be a run-oriented offense. You have Cortland Sutton. Once Flacco was replaced by Drew Lock, whether it was because Drew Lock, they wanted him to play a safer type of game, his numbers actually decreased significantly. His targets were around the same, but every other stat and metric, it dropped. So I know it's a small sample size, but that is one concern. Is Noah Fant going to take that next step? I know a lot of people, including Ian Hartitz, who we had on our show, he believes so. And bring in Melvin Gordon. Are they going to really commit to the run? You have Mike Munchak, the offensive line coach that came from Pittsburgh, one of the best in the game. So I think that's kind of the direction that team is headed. They have a solid defense, and I just can't see him. He's going wide receiver 18 here. Again, only in redraft. We have him coming in the mid-20s. Robert Woods is going right after him, according to Fantasy Pros ADP. There is no doubt in my mind I would take Robert Woods ahead of Cortland Sutton strictly for 2020.
Yeah, I think it's important, John, for the listeners here of the show to understand where you're coming from as far as, you're looking at market value, you're looking at ADP, you're looking at your options. I hope our listeners know that in no way that John is saying he does not want these guys, because we recognize their talents. Sutton's a stud, Metcalf's a stud, but we talked about last night about going running back heavy in a draft. If you're not going to neglect that running back position, you're not going to get all the guys you want in your rankings there. So there is some talent behind Sutton and Metcalf that you could get, whether it's a DJ Shark, a Keenan Allen, a Terry McLaurin, and balance your roster off a little bit more and still have a stud receiver. So I love Denver. I'm a Drew Lock believer, even though Mitch argues with me. But there are some things against Sutton that says, he's not going to take the next step, at least right away. When you draft a Jerry Jeudy, who's a stud, and you have running backs that could catch the ball, and Fant's another year under his belt. So I think it's the where you draft him that's the key.
And Dan, I'm glad you jumped in with that, because I know, and we all know, that when people listen to anything that's said, they go, oh, JB, he doesn't like these guys. Cortland Sutton, DK Metcalf, and then my third receiver that I'm going to bring up eventually, they're athletic monsters. And they have they're a wide receiver one in the making, but this is strictly for 2020, where I can get other players, just like Dan said. I don't like these guys at their current price, and that's the reason I'm avoiding them. Now, if they would drop significantly, sure, that's a different story. But thanks, Dan. I appreciate that.
Good contrarian takes that gives some listeners something to think about.
Yes, sir.
Welcome.
There's a lot of can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Mic check. There's a lot of QB uncertainty in Denver. I did take some time over the last couple of days, because I had off work, to watch some football games in condensed version, and they were dead last in passing touchdowns last year, bottom 5 in passing first downs, and bottom 5 in rushing first downs as well. So that just is terrible offensive play. Bottom 10 in points for as a team. I like to look at these broader stats. Only 194.4 passing yards per game. I know these include Joe Flacco being the quarterback part-time, but I like what I saw in flashes from Drew Lock. I think that this isn't really a comp, but I think at his high end, he could be like a slightly more accurate Josh Allen. That's kind of what he looked like to me on the field. His footwork's a little sloppy with his dropbacks. To make it short, he just kind of looks weird doing it and takes very long strides. And maybe that's just how he does it, but he has a cannon of an arm off platform, and he was decently accurate with it last year. Just didn't have a lot of opportunity in only 5 games. I think he has a solid pocket presence. So this all goes to, Cortland Sutton. Like you said, it's all about price, but I just think that in some world, maybe it's a very slim chance there could be, maybe not this season, but to put to put a dynasty perspective on it. And I know you said you don't hate any of these guys, but to put a dynasty spin on it, because we're all at heart dynasty players here talking. I could see this being a team with 2 top 15 wide receivers. Maybe not this year, obviously, probably not this year, but down the road, if Drew Lock does work out for them. There's been 2 wide receivers on the same team in the top 15 every season going back to 2011, and then I didn't see one in 2010. So just something interesting to think about, because I love Sutton and Judy as talents. It's just a question of that offense as a whole. And I think that adding Melvin Gordon is actually going to take a lot of pressure off Drew Lock and allow him to take his time, breaking into this league.
Yeah, they're great points there. This offense is one that's definitely intrigued me this offseason. I mean, you go back to last year, I give Denver's coaching staff a lot of credit. You mentioned watching some of their games. I mean, their second and third receivers were Deshaun Hamilton and Tim Patrick, with the rookie quarterback that needed some time to develop. And, we had Woody Page, who has been covering Denver for 30 years on our show, and he said this kid's got the it factor. He's confident, so I think it's just a matter of development and maturity for this team. But I think they do take a year two jump, and if you could be just a little bit of patient, I think Drew Lock will continue to develop. And like you said, guys like Sutton and Judy, they're still going to continue to grow, and Fant's going to grow. And now you have Hamler, too, as another guy to stretch the field. There's a lot of potential in Denver, and two good running backs that could – catch the ball, run the ball, with an offensive line that has one of the best offensive line coaches in football. I mean, there's a lot of good pieces in place for the Broncos.
Yeah, you mentioned two good running backs. It's Melvin Gordon and Royce Freeman, right, Dan?
Oh, come on, JB. You had to put that out there.
Royce Freeman just looked terrible when I was watching those games. I mean, not terrible, but he just doesn't have that wow factor like the other guys.
Yeah, he was disappointing. But one last thing on Courtland Sutton. Again, you're going to see a common theme with my three guys. I want opportunity, and that's one of the reasons that I would take a David Montgomery over DK Metcalf. And I just don't know here in 2020, strictly 2020, that Courtland Sutton is going to have enough opportunity to really take that next leap. Again, we have him coming in really low end wide receiver 2, teetering on that wide receiver 3 range. I know a lot of people are going to say, hey, John, this sounds a little hot takey. And I'm not a hot take person. This is just the way our projections came out. And Courtland Sutton, he's going to need more volume in that offense to really hit his ceiling, in my opinion.
Yeah, it may take a Drew Lock third year, with Judy getting another year to take some pressure off. And I think you're on the right path. It's just a matter of, I think it's going to be a year or two before Sutton really breaks out, or have the potential to in it with that offense.
Yeah, and to be transparent, I think I only have one share of Drew Lock. I'm not pushing the chips in on Drew Lock by any means, but I just thought I wanted to mention that when I watched his games, he was intriguing to me and has some flashes of greatness that he needs to put together.
And I like Drew. I made a move to acquire him in Heroes and Villains earlier in the offseason. I have Drew Lock on that roster.
I totally spaced on that.
I'm throwing out my challenge flag because I'm low on Drew Lock shares too, because John owns too many of them. I think 3 or 4 leagues I went to get an extra Drew Lock share. It's like, who has it? John Bauer. I'm like, I'm never getting them. So.
I mean, it's the Josh Allen, even Daniel Jones, Drew Lock. They all were dirt cheap coming out, but these guys are going to get the opportunity. And now here we are, and I have a decent amount of shares of Drew Lock. So if anybody wants to pay up, the business is open.
That's the problem. You got to pay up too much.
Well, first ever challenge flag on the Gem Drafter podcast here, thrown by Dan LaMagna. It's history, boys.
Glad to throw it on JB any day. He knows that. With love.
Perfect. I'm gonna jump right into my number 2 here. My picks are a little bit contrarian if you look at fantasy Twitter right now. Fantasy Twitter, for the most part, that the stuff that I see loves all these guys that I'm going to be talking about tonight. And my number 2 is Cooper Kupp. And it's not that I hate Cooper Kupp. I think he's a good player, but we just have yet to see what he's really done other than a 2-game sample size when Cooks is not on the field. What is Cooper Kupp going to do when I don't think that team has a true speed threat. So that's going to bring that defense closer to the line of scrimmage, where Cooper Kupp does a lot of his work, an ADOT of 7.5 yards. Goff is a mediocre quarterback at best. I don't have it right in front of me, but I remember someone trolling me in a league where I owned a share of Goff last year with a video of someone literally made a cut up of Jared Goff's 20-something extra interceptions that were dropped by cornerbacks last year. So add 20-something to his interception total possibly. But I mean, we could do that for probably any QB in the league besides some of the top dogs. But I don't think Cooper Kupp can play on the outside. And like towards the end of the year when Gerald Everett was hurt and they were featuring Tyler Higbee, they started to play a lot more 11 personnel, yada, yada. I know everyone's been saying this lately, but that's something to think about if you don't think that Cooper Kupp can succeed very well on the outside. If they're running 2 wide receiver sets, that means Kupp's either on the outside or he's not on the field. And I don't think there's any way he's not on the field because he's obviously a good player, but he's just not a speed threat. And I'm just going back to that. They don't have a speed threat anymore. Middle of the 4th round in redraft, that's fine for where he finished last year. But I mean, this offense is kind of sketchy in the same regard as the Broncos. I believe in McVay, but I just don't know what to expect from this offense this year. And in Dynasty, I'd rather have guys like Chark and CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy over him. I just think they have a much higher upside at this point, much younger. Kupp is 27 years old already. So I don't have any shares of Cooper Kupp. Like I said, I don't hate the guy, but I'm out on Cooper Kupp. Untrustworthy.
I actually like Cooper Kupp still. And I know there was that transition to more 12 personnel, and it went from about 6%. And I actually just submitted an article about Robert Woods, so this information's on the top of my brain here. But they went from 6% of 12 personnel early in the season. It transitioned to about 15%. Not a huge number, and they're still running a lot out of 11 personnel with the 3 receivers. But now you have, who's your third option? Josh Reynolds, Van Jefferson, and I think you're going to see a lot of Everett and Higbee, but I still like Cooper Kupp, and I think a lot of people, he is starting to fall on the draft boards because of that concern, and especially what we saw from Robert Woods. There was a stretch towards the end of the season. Woods was wide receiver 7, and I do think that's going to be continuing here, but if Cooper Kupp can stay healthy, he has that touchdown upside. And you look at some of these receivers and you talk about regression. There's some guys, though, they just get those touchdowns. One of them, he's up on the wall right here, Devontae Adams. And then, well, certainly not Robert Woods, I almost said, but Cooper Kupp. He's a guy that he gets in the end zone. And I think this team, they're going to have to throw the ball. You made the comparison, Newts, to the Broncos. Broncos are going to run the ball. And then the report came out today, they might have a 4-person committee in that backfield. If you have 4 running backs, you don't have any. So I think they're going to throw the ball a lot. I still like Cooper Kupp, especially if his price continues to drop, because there are growing concerns there. And you said that your take here might be contrarian. I actually think a lot of people agree with you up to this point on that one.
Yeah, I think I'll add a lot for our listeners to go in the middle of both of you guys there and give them a lot to evaluate. When you look at Cooper Kupp, I agree with John. I love the player. Absolutely love Cooper Kupp. Like him on my rosters if I could get him. But when this category you tasked us with, Newt, is looking at trust, and we're looking at the ADP, and if he is, 18th, I think Woods could be more of a value at 28. Or for, talking dynasty, I'm more attracted to sliding a little bit, getting a running back, and landing at a DJ Shark, Keenan Allen, Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel pre-injury, maybe even Tyler Boyd. So I like Kupp, and the Rams do make me nervous, and that's where the trust factor comes in, and I might slide and be happy landing with another one of those receivers if their offensive line struggles again. And if there is no running game like you're mentioning, John, that puts a lot of pressure on the passing game. And do Kupp and Woods get banged up and kind of burn out by the end of the season? A little bit like Mike Evans and Godwin did. They had phenomenal seasons last year, but I think by the time we got to playoff time and championship time in our leagues, I think that the wheels were falling off those guys a little bit. So I worry about the wheels falling off late in the season, and in Dynasty you might land with one of those other guys. But the talent's there. Maybe McVay, proves us wrong and patches up that offensive line enough, and that's where we hope there's a preseason and we can start seeing some things and evaluating, how the Rams are going to be.
Quickly, speaking of Tyler Boyd that you just mentioned, in a recent startup, I took Tyler Boyd over Devontae Parker. What's your take on that, Dan?
Tyler Boyd over Parker. I love Boyd. Dynasty, I'm Boyd all the way. He's got multiple 1,000-yard seasons. We're concerned about A.J. Green's health. I think he's 1A or 1B now, and once Green is either off the field or leaves as a free agent next year, he is the one. I love those slot matchups. Great job with Boyd. More trust there for sure.
Not to get too far off topic, but Boyd is still sneaky young, and he's the new Justin Jefferson, as weird as that sounds to say.
Yeah, we've said the same exact thing, and this is the best quarterback he's going to be playing with, coming off of back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. AJ Green, we don't know exactly what to expect here. And when we had Liz Loza on Dynasty Theory in her rest versus rust series, you talk about guys, oh, well, they missed a season, but now they're well rested. She wasn't exactly giving out a glowing endorsement there for AJ Green here in 2020. So yes, he signed the tender. He is going to be playing, but Tyler Boyd, I think his target share is going to drop, but his catchable target percentage is going to increase, and that's going to offset any drop there in the target share. So I'm all on board with Tyler Boyd for short-term and long-term.
What I hope is the Bengals take advantage of this kind of nucleus they're building, because we all see the potential right now, but they are very high on my dysfunction list. I'm always worried that they're going to find a way to mess it up and ruin Burrow's career. But I am pleased to see good indicators. Even though we do have those concerns about AJ Green, they could have easily said we're not paying him, 20-some million, whatever he's making this year on that tag. I think they were smart not signing him to a long-term deal because of those health concerns. But they says, hey, we're going to put this veteran, we're going to roll on his health for this year and put the talent around Joe Burrow so we get him off to a good start here in year one. And hopefully T. Higgins could become that next guy, or they put some more talent around that passing game next year. So hopefully the Bengals could keep this momentum that they have right now. They're a team that's known to rely on their draft, and all their drafts have not been good, but we're a little more encouraged of what they're doing recently.
I could totally see them ending in middle of the pack or around pick 12 for next year's NFL draft and landing Jamar Chase, as that would be crazy. Dan, do you want to jump into your number 2 guy?
Yeah, my number 2, I know it's your birthday tonight, so I don't know if we got some good guys coming up. We might not have to spend as much time as him. He's not as interesting as some of these other guys we're talking about. But I have Anthony Miller here with the Bears, and we talked about him just last night, John, as far as a guy that, has some sneaky value late if he slides enough. But currently ADP, if I could find Mr. Anthony Miller again, where I struggle with Anthony Miller is where the Bears are at right now. John knows I am just so scarred and anti-Nick Foles at this point. I'm not encouraged by Mitch Trubisky, no matter who wins the job, or if we have a quarterback carousel and they're switching them halfway through or after a few weeks. Their offensive line's got questions. Miller's health has been questionable. So for me, even though I do see some talent there, I believe he's working hard on a mission. I think he has the potential to have a better year this year. But, I thought about this more after our conversation, John, last night, and we're looking at projections. I can see Cohen getting more of the catches still than potentially Anthony Miller. And if we're talking dynasty, I know when we get to the draft, I'm going to be enticed by Preston Williams. Everybody knows I'm high on Laviska Shenault. Sterling Shepard's got it upside. I just don't have enough trust in Anthony Miller to take him where he's going around 53. There's some just other guys with more upside that I like. I might even go veteran and look at a Marvin Jones or a John Brown that is kind of underrated, or the upside of Shenault or Paris Campbell. So I just don't trust him. I like him if he slides late enough to me, but I won't take him at his current ADP.
Dan, you always yell at me and you say that I lack conviction. Well, I'm going to give you conviction right now. You're wrong on this one. Anthony Miller, he has wide receiver 2 upside, not the wide receiver 2, but that 13 to 24 range. That's his ceiling. But going at wide receiver 53, I don't even think that's his floor. His floor is going to be beyond that. So if he's healthy, we have him, Mitch and I have him slated around 110 targets here, because I do believe that can be that slight shift between Cohen and Anthony Miller. At that price, the upside is tremendous. And at that point in the draft, that's what we're looking for. The only thing would be Preston Williams. You're right. He is going right there. But Anthony Miller at that price, I don't see how. I'm putting my stamp of approval right there.
I have my tennis racket and I'm countering right now. And if I'm looking dynasty and upside and potential and a league winning wide receiver in dynasty, Preston Williams, Brandon Ayuk, Denzel Mims, Michael Pittman, I am going to make sure I get one of those guys that have a good quarterback and talent versus no quarterback and injury history and upside. So
okay, well,
I think everything's got to be aligned for that projection of yours to go right there, including health. I mean, you're really going to bank on Nick Foles and Mitch Trubisky for the next 3 years?
We still have him coming in like wide receiver 40 based on the projections. It's not like we're saying he's going to be a top 12 receiver, but one of two things is going to happen here in 2020. Nick Foles is going to play well, or guess what? He's not, and they're going to move on from him and Mitchell Trubisky.
And then they're starting over again, and he's stuck with who knows who. I just think there's guys that have number 1 upside versus him having number 2 upside in that range.
You mentioned Brandon Ayuk. He has number 1 upside.
They were comparing. Niners liked him as much as CD Lamb.
Yeah,
you got an offense that's high powered. I believe in Kyle Shanahan and Jimmy Garoppolo versus the Bears and Nick Foles or Mitch Trubisky. So I would roll the dice.
Time out.
Time out by Newts.
Too much time being spent on Anthony Miller here. Say something, John, if you want to.
No, I'm good. We'll move on because I'm getting fired up over here.
We'll fight this.
I want to give my piece of Anthony Miller here. I've been the ultimate Anthony Miller truther since he came into the league. I think in one league that year in the rookie draft, I got him at the 208, and I was ecstatic. I totally believe in the talent, but I'm with Dan. Screw those QBs. They both suck. I don't believe in them at all. I don't trust them, so I can't trust their wide receivers unless it's Allen Robinson because he's, a Michael Thomas type guy getting targets like crazy. But I agree with John also that there is upside if by some miracle those QBs get it together or something special happens in Chicago this year. I'm not mad at the draft price. I would probably draft Anthony Miller, but I can also see why Dan's not trusting him. I was actually going to come in here and bust your balls a little bit, Dan, and be like, who is trusting Anthony Miller? But I guess John is. So
I'm trusting him at his price.
I'm just poking the bear.
Yeah, I know. Come on, Newts.
Mitch and I love when we poke the bear with John because he gets worked up too easy. So we just for entertainment purposes, we love poking that bear. But we love you, John. We definitely see the value in your projection. There is potential there.
Just real quick before we move on, once he was seeing the field on a regular basis and he was in that lineup, this is the stretch: 13 targets, 9 catches, 140 yards. 4 targets, 3 catches, 42 yards, touchdown. 15 targets, 9 catches, 118 yards, 1 touchdown. So the potential is there. There is that upside. 9 targets, 11 targets. It is there. And if you can't see that, Dan, I don't know what to tell you. Maybe you need these glasses.
But John, then they signed and drafted 18 tight ends to say they're going to run the ball more. Montgomery's going to take the next step. Ted Ginn comes in there to take a little love away. And you're still hoping he's healthy and there's not a quarterback carousel. But you are correct with that assessment. The potential is there. They did show him volume, and when he's healthy and on the field, he can perform.
All right, Newts, who are we talking about next?
That was a good one, John.
One last thing to John's point is that he did have pretty much the same QB situation last year. Unless Foles is worse than Trubisky, that would be insane if he is. I'm going to go with my number 1 here. I'm going to let you guys drop your number 1s after me. My number 1 untrustworthy wide receiver right now is another guy that I don't think is a bad football player, but I'm just not trusting him at his value or what some people are valuing him at, and that's Jalen Reagor. I hope I said his name right there. I think I did. Of the Philadelphia Eagles. Just looking at that wide receiver group, it's super sketchy. Deshaun Jackson, Alshon Jeffrey, and then if you're thinking those guys are going to play this year, Reagor, and they're already saying Jeffrey's going to start on the pup, and Deshaun Jackson's got his weirdness going on right now that I don't even want to get into. But Djax hasn't played a healthy season since 2014, I don't believe. So if Reagor is all of a sudden thrown into the spotlight, if both of these guys are missing time, I think he's going to be getting heavy defensive attention because he is a burner. And I know that the team passing stats are nice with Carson Wentz, 8th in passing attempts last year, 11th in passing yards, 12th in passing touchdowns. So that's, top third of the league for the most part. I don't know. I didn't dig into the actual wide receivers target share, but I just wanted to add these points. 46% of the targets last year went to those 2 tight ends, Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert and Miles Sanders. 53% of the passing yardage went to those players, and 51% of the passing touchdowns went to those players. And I'm not even including Boston Scott's little run at the end of the year in those stats. So with all that being said, I'm out on Jalen Reagor's value for this year. I think he's going to be a dynasty buy next year because I think he's going to struggle as a rookie being the only wide receiver of consequence on the field unless miraculously J-Jaw gets it together or Hightower is their 6th round rookie pick. John Hightower is something special. And just looking at last year's rushing for the Eagles too, 7th in rushing attempts, 11th in rushing yards. So I think this is a hard-nosed team that wants to play 2 tight ends, hit them hard with Miles Sanders. Those are my takes on Reagor. I just think that he's going to take some time to develop, and I see a lot of people calling for him over Julian Lamb, and I think that's a mistake.
Mitch and I have him as the only rookie receiver cracking the top 35 this year. So I actually like him at his redraft price. And if you're landing at that point for dynasty purposes, I think the hype will be building. Like you said, that depleted wide receiver core, the expectation is that Alshon Jeffrey is going to miss some time. And like you said, Deshaun Jackson, we're not even going to get into that. But I do think the passing opportunity is still going to be there in that offense. And Jalen Reagor, he's going to be somebody that can benefit. That's just my opinion, though.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I mean, I'm more with Newts, but I'm definitely biased because he's an Eagle, and I'm like anti-Philadelphia Eagles, as we know. Don't get me wrong; I'll draft the Miles Sanders. I could overlook the Eagles for the right guy, but I agree with the take on talent. If it's dynasty, I'm betting on talent versus situation here. It goes back to not drafting AJ Brown last year because of the Titans, and he turned out to just be awesome. So kind of flipping the script. I think he's in a great situation, so I could definitely see the projections making a lot of sense there, John. I mean, opportunity knocks. I don't believe Jeffrey or Deshaun Jackson could definitely stay healthy. If he could learn the offense quick enough, the opportunity is going to be there. But I would much rather have Ruggs, Lamb, Judy, a lot of guys in Dynasty.
Interesting list there. Adding Ruggs and because a lot of people have Reagor based on opportunity as their wide receiver 1. But yeah, I just think he's going to struggle this year. I don't think he's a bad player. I think he could definitely, the upside of Reagor is he has an Odell Beckham like rookie season. That's the upside. But that comes around once in a generation, and I'm not willing to put that on Reagor. Unless you guys have any other thoughts, let's jump into one of your guys' number 1.
I'm locked and loaded here, if you don't mind, JB. I just want to say Brandon Cooks. There's a lot of hype about wanting to take him and his potential in that Houston offense, and he is by far my least trusted guy. In Dynasty, I don't want him at all. I have 0 shares, and I will remain 0 shares unless someone just wants a charity giveaway. I'll stash him on my bench for the upside that he stays healthy. Redrafted, you have to really slide to me. But any player that's had 5 concussions and is on their 4th NFL team is wearing thin to me. Why aren't these teams keeping him? How many concussions could one man withstand? He's small. He's not getting any stronger or bigger or younger. So for me, again, I love a receiver with Deshaun Watson. So, but I am concerned about that entire Houston offense staying healthy. Again, if the price is absolutely right, I'll roll the dice, maybe play him when he's healthy. He could have some breakout games because you have Deshaun Watson. But Dynasty, let someone else take that risk for NFL teams, and 5 concussions later, I am out. He is dead to me, as they say in the Shark Tank.
I mean, to play devil's advocate on Brandon Cooks, I know he has the concussions, but you mentioned his several productive seasons, but the teams aren't keeping him. I mean, maybe that's just because he's a hot commodity that people want with his speed attached to that production. And he really hasn't been injured that much other than the concussions. He's in a new situation this year with the Texans, and they're pretty much middle of the pack. But if David Johnson turns out to be a bust this year, they're going to be relying heavily on the passing game. And we know Deshaun Watson is a baller. He will find a way to score points and put up yardage. Deshaun Watson the last 2 years has had Russell Wilson type seasons. I don't know about the efficiency side of it. I didn't look deep into that, but 4,100 yards and 26 touchdowns 2 years ago. And then last year, 3,800 yards and 26 touchdowns. So if it's not going to be Cooks, is it going to be Fuller? Because we know he hasn't been able to stay on the field. Is it going to be Kenny Stills, who's facing a felony charge for standing on a lawn? I don't know the whole story to that. I was trying to have a joke there. But who is it going to be if it's not David Johnson sucking up Christian McCaffrey like targets for the Texans?
Yeah, and that's the point, that the potential is there for him to break out. But this is my problem with Deshaun Watson this year as well. I mean, I think he's a top 3 NFL quarterback, but I don't like his situation. I'm even taking my boy Dak. Dak goes from number 4 to number 3 because of the Texans situation. I'm going to rather I would rather Will Fuller because of age and although that's just as risky. I love McCole Hardman. I love T.Y. Hilton, Deontay Johnson, N'Keal Harry. There's just so many guys around there that just have so much more upside and long-term potential in dynasty or win now value. I just think Cooks falls behind all those guys in his class with all that risk that is there. So again, for me, it's just, we're talking dynasty. I like to alleviate my risk. If I am going to take risk, it's going to be a guy that I believe in the film, the analysis, and the health risks aren't as much there.
If I have Brandon Cooks in Dynasty, which I still have several shares, I would be looking to move him at some point early in the season because I do think he's going to be that number one receiving option. And I don't want a player that's had those, 5 concussions that I think I can move for a decent price at that point. Now in redraft, I actually took him in the 10th round of the Scott Fish Bowl, and I love the upside at that point. Now, if it's a bust, it's a bust, but I do think he presents that opportunity, especially in a situation like that in the Scott Fish Bowl where you have 1,440 teams. You need to hit on some of those lottery picks. I think Brandon Cooks could be that guy, and he does. Like I said, he presents that upside at that point in the draft. So I think he's going to be okay for 2020. But in Dynasty, I'm on board with Dan. I would be looking to move him, not right now because you're not getting anything, but I'd be looking to move him 1, 2, 3 weeks into the season if he has a big game.
Yeah, I'm definitely off him in Dynasty too. I was just playing a little bit of devil's advocate there. And when I think about it more, the type of QB that Deshaun Watson is, he's a baller. He wants to make big time throws, and sometimes those big time throws result in hanging your guy out to dry. And one more of those for Cooks, and he could be definitely done. So I personally sold him right when the move happened to Houston for a 2021 second to an owner that's he values veterans very highly. So that's a move that you should definitely be looking to take. I would take that value all day. Too much dysfunction in Houston. I wanted to throw that in there.
There is right now. It's concerning me. We'll see what happens though. Hopefully it gets fixed for Deshaun Watson. I don't want to see his career get spoiled. He's fabulous to watch.
It's okay if we run a little bit long here, getting to our closer, but we got one more untrustworthy wide receiver to talk about here. John, take it.
Yeah, and I'll be fairly quick, and I know a lot of people, they're going to disagree with this, but for me, it's A.J. Brown, and I've talked about him on several guest spots on different shows. I've talked about him on Dynasty Theory. He's going wide receiver 16 in redraft. So again, this is 2020 only. I can't see him cracking that. And right behind him, Calvin Ridley in ADP is wide receiver 17. I would make a wager, and I haven't been going to the casino because I've been in quarantine. So if anybody wants to make a wager, you let me know. But I will take Calvin Ridley over A.J. Brown in 2020 without a doubt. I want volume. A.J. Brown, he was hyper efficient, yards after catch monster. We know that yards after catch is not a sticky statistic year after year. And that offense, and I've talked about this before, it was one of the most efficient red zone offenses that we've seen in recent memory. I believe it was 77% touchdown rate, and the next closest team, and that was with Ryan Tannehill at quarterback, and the next closest team for the season, I believe it was the Packers at 67%. And in the article that I wrote about Robert Woods, Ryan Tannehill was another guy that was included. So that's kind of why I was able just to throw that out. I wish I could remember all those stats like that. That would be pretty incredible. But yeah, A.J. Brown, I just think there was too much. They were hyper efficient, and I hate to knock somebody and say we're going to see regression, but I really do think it's going to be difficult for A.J. Brown to have that efficiency, and his yards per route run was like 2.7-ish. So it was one of the best. It was right behind Michael Thomas, and then there was one other guy. He came in third. So there's definitely opportunity for him in terms of what he can do with the ball, but I just don't think there's going to be enough of it. So wide receiver 16, 2020, A.J. Brown is not going to top that.
Well, I think that the efficiency is almost surely going to regress. I think that there could be some room for some more targets going his way. Just a little bit, and he's a big play threat, man. And looking back to Tannehill's Miami days, he had this guy on his team that came along and kind of broke out. His name was Jarvis Landry. And I think A.J. Brown is a souped up Jarvis Landry. And I think Ryan Tannehill loves him. I spent a lot of time the last 2 days watching games I had mentioned before. Well, I brutally watched the first 6 games from the Titans last season because I wanted to see the difference between Mariota and Ryan Tannehill. And Mariota is, if you have any shares of, not to get too far off topic again, if you have any shares of Mariota, sell for whatever you can get, because I don't think he's taking that job unless it's just handed to him. He was so terrible at the start of last year, and it was a big difference going to Ryan Tannehill, even though I don't think Tannehill is, the next greatest thing since sliced bread. I love AJ Brown's talent. I think it's a fine take that he's going to regress this year from that ADP of wide receiver 16. I think it's a fine take to think that he's not going to finish there this year, but I think he's just a stud in general of a football player. And getting a little long-winded here, but I just want to quote a couple stats I looked up. I know nobody plays in standard fantasy leagues anymore.
What's
but
that?
In standard fantasy leagues last year, down that 9-game stretch when he played with Tannehill, if you take his fantasy points per game during that 9-game stretch, he would actually be the wide receiver 3 in fantasy points per game behind Godwin and MT. So that's where we kind of see the volume come into play, because if we're looking at PPR, MT was crushing with 23.4 fantasy points per game, and we see AJ Brown in that stretch fall down to that wide receiver 12 range. I don't have his exact fantasy points per game. Oh, yeah, I do actually. It's 15.8 over that 9-game stretch. So not super special, but if you're drafting him at wide receiver 16 and he is the wide receiver 12, what you said, they're going to see some red zone regression. One thing I will give you, John, is that he did get shut down big time by AJ Boye in week 3 last year. But that guy's no longer in the division. So I definitely see your point, but I'm wheels up on AJ Brown. I'm taking him right in that 4th round range, that DJ Moore range. I'd probably take DJ Moore over him, but I like AJ Brown.
Yeah, and by no means am I saying his target share is not going to go up. We have him around 110 targets. So there is going to be an increase, but I just can't see it. Like I said, I'll take a DJ Moore for 2020. I'll take a Calvin Ridley without even thinking about it over AJ Brown in 2020.
I'll kind of split the difference on both of you guys with my wager here. And I can see John's point projection-wise where Calvin Ridley or DJ Moore is going to do better in 2020. We are talking dynasty, so long-term, I think A.J. Brown's or DJ Moore is a guy.
You keep saying we're talking dynasty. My worry was strictly in 2020.
But dynasty's not a one-year sport here, my friend. This dynasty is a strategic.
Correct me if I'm wrong. In the show notes, did it not say it could be 2020 focused or dynasty centric?
But we do come from the Dynasty Theory podcast. Last I checked,
And to start the show, Dan, I said while we talk about dynasty, I wanted to look at redraft. Newts, this is when Dan and Mitch don't listen to me, and this is where you know what it is. It's dysfunction.
And John yells at Mitch and I when we talk redraft. It's like against his religion until tonight. So I'm not quite sure. But my last point on this would be the one thing we didn't talk about last night, John. We did have an AJ Brown discussion. There is that little part of me that loves this Titans offense. They have a solid plan, and I could really see this offense this year running through Henry, Jonnu Smith, AJ Brown, like the triplets, and just doing some magical things. So I'm with John as far as this year's projections. If I'm betting money on it, or Ridley could have a better year. But, man, A.J. Brown, I don't know if I'd want to pass that up. So I know where you're at there, Newts. But listeners, you got to go with your own gut here and follow your instincts.
Yeah, definitely follow your instincts, take in all the data that you can, whether it be, metrics or, Dan, I wanted to mention, too, I'm more of a film watcher as well. I'm more of an eye test type of guy. So you always want to do that type of research on your own, but listen to other people's takes and really think deeply about all these takes that we got going out tonight, because dynasty is such a crazy, and fantasy, I should say, rather, is such a crazy game. So we're over an hour here now. That's totally fine. I'm not in a huge rush here, guys. I'm going to be all right. But let's close this show out with some dynasty wide receiver trade targets. Why don't you take it from here, John?
I'm going to be very quick. They're all somewhat similarly valued. And now, Dan, I'm going to transition to Dynasty. And I wanted to talk about 2020 only because on Dynasty Theory, we do talk Dynasty. And yes, I yell at you on our show, but I'm not going to yell at you on Newt's show here. Come on.
Oh, you did a couple times.
I know. He gets me fired up. I can't help myself.
Throwing
But
a flag on John.
Yeah.
15 yards.
I'm going to be pretty quick here. It's going to be Christian Kirk, Dynasty ADP, wide receiver 35. Tyler Boyd, wide receiver 26. Michael Gallup, wide receiver 33. For Kirk and Gallup, there's an influx of talent, obviously DeAndre Hopkins and then CeeDee Lamb coming in. But I still think those guys, they're going to be solid wide receiver twos on the respective team. And you're getting that discount here. Again, wide receiver 33 and 35 for two young receivers that could certainly be around a 20% target share on two teams that are going to throw the ball. And then Tyler Boyd, we already talked about him. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but this is the best quarterback he's ever played with in the NFL. No respect to Mr. Andy Dalton. But, I think AJ Green, this is going to be his last year in Cincinnati. Yes, T. Higgins, I like him a lot, but Tyler Boyd, he's going to get a lot of opportunity in the slot. And I think his catchable target share is going to increase, and it's going to be one of the highest he's had up to this point. So those are the three guys. Go out there, target them, buy them now while you can get them at a decent discount. And I think the best time to get them right now is in a startup, because if people like me have them, there's no friends and family discount here. There's no BOGO sale. You're going to have to pay full price.
All your guys are full price. Who you kidding?
Yeah, I like that a lot. And, Christian Kirk had over 100 targets last year. And I could see that repeating even with DeAndre Hopkins on the roster if they're a pass-heavy team. And I think Kyler Murray's a good quarterback. So I love that. I love Tyler Boyd, as I previously stated on this podcast already. And I think Michael Gallup's a buy at the right price. But I'm just so in love with CeeDee Lamb. I think he's going to be a super stud in the league. So I can't get down with Michael Gallup, doing anything on the Cowboys going forward unless something happens to Cooper or Cooper leaves town. I just think Lamb is such a talent.
I just think there's enough opportunity there to go around. I think they're going to be really close to that 600 total passing attempts. Yes, Mike McCarthy's coming in, but he kept Kellen Moore for a reason. And I think they're going to be able to let him run his offense, and they want to be a faster paced team, which they were. I think they were first or second in pace of play last year. And you see them throw more on first and second down than they did previously, where it was just run, pass, run, pass. Dan knows that all too well. But I think there's going to be enough opportunity there for all three of those guys to be productive. But it really does. I think, Newt, you said this. It comes down to the price. But right now, the price on Gallup, I think it's right.
I like John's guys. I think Dallas, it's like an Indianapolis situation the year Manning and all his receivers blew up. I think there's enough love for all of them. I appreciate that jersey there, John. Boyd, we talked about already. Love Boyd in a situation. Christian Kirk makes me a little bit nervous. That'd be the only one, John, I would say, if the price was right. I wouldn't mind him on my roster by any means. Where he's fallen ADP, there are some guys I like more, just because I think Larry Fitzgerald's still going to be a thorn in the sides there. Nuke is going to eat up the targets. Drake's going to have a big season. So he makes me a little bit nervous based on the guys around him. But all three players I wouldn't mind on my roster.
The only concern with Christian Kirk, and I'm not saying their style of play is exactly the same, but you look at a player like DJ Moore, who really is, and Mitch always yells at me when I say this because he says every wide receiver is, but DJ Moore and Christian Kirk, they're guys that really need targets because they really don't have that high touchdown upside. So they need those targets to supplement that. But I do think Christian Kirk in that offense, he's going to see about a 20% target share. Arizona wants to move quickly, and there's going to be a lot of short, quick throws that we saw last year, and it's going to continue. Yes, Larry Fitzgerald's going to be a thorn in the side, but that's a very temporary thorn in the side. So
early in his career, Kenyon Drake had a reputation for being soft injury-wise. So, I mean, if, like I said, with Houston, a little bit less dysfunction going on in Arizona, if something happens to Kenyon Drake and one of those other guys can't step up, we could see a pass attempt record set, So that's why I'm intrigued by Kirk, but at the right price, looking to buy everyone price dependent, right, John?
Absolutely. There's no other way.
I got to catch up on the last two shows you guys put out. I have had off for a couple of days and I just haven't gotten to it. So I'll get on that.
They were a lot.
Worth the wait, right?
They were a lot of fun. We got a blast.
I listened to the Liz Loza on Chris Harris podcast. I like Chris Harris because he has that eye test perspective and film based perspective. Dan, why don't you hit us with your wide receiver trade targets for Dynasty?
So these three guys are the opposite end of the spectrum of my first three, where I was concerned about situations. These are just three offenses that I'm enamored with. I love the organizations. I love the direction they're going in. I think all three organizations could be good for, quite a few years. The first one's my boy Amari Cooper. John's heard him verbatim so often, but I think it's just the time right now to bring him up where, before CeeDee Lamb, he was a second-round pick. CeeDee Lamb comes into the picture, and all of a sudden he's a fourth-round pick. So I want a number one receiver at a fourth-round value who, just staying healthy is the key. I love that the Clapper's out of there. I think they're going to I think you can't double cover Amari Cooper now in this offense with the guys that are there. I think Lamb in year one is just going to take Randall Cobb's touches, 55 receptions. Cooper's still going to get all his love and attention. He's still only 25 years old and just in an ideal situation. If it's only 2 great years in Dallas and then they let him walk, I hope he's great somewhere else. But I'm high on Cooper at least for the next 2 years. Marquise Hollywood Brown, his situation, he's got his health right now. Okay, it's tough for rookies in year one. He went in injured. When he did play, boy, did he flash. He is in incredible shape. He looks awesome on social media. All the highlights he's showing. He's been working out with some elite receivers. I think he is set up for the number one receiver in Baltimore this year, and in a passing game that's going to take another positive jump. And then my last one's Mecole Hardman. This one's a little bit more heart and a little more risk than the other two because, yes, John, because I played basketball with him. I'll go with the shameless plug there. We had some fun. But there's also some more risk that I think he's still maybe 1 year away with, Sammy Watkins being back. You have Tyreek Hill and Kelsey. But just looking at film, boy, does he flash. I'm a Georgia Bulldog fan, and I loved watching him in Georgia. I couldn't understand why they didn't get him the ball more. Last year in Kansas City, he flashed again. He is in phenomenal shape again. I think he's going to take a year 2 jump. It's just a matter, is there enough volume to get that production back completely this year? So I think you got to be a little bit more patient with Mecole Hardman. But I just love the talent, and I love the situation of those three guys.
I think that's a great list, and Cooper is at a great price, like you said. Beckham's down in that range, and Cooper's, I believe, 2 years younger than Beckham, and I think he's a very talented player. And I have the same guy as you, Mecole Hardman, to start off my list. He was up there, albeit a small sample size, with 20 yards per reception. And we know that in that offense, Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce are the big dogs. And then probably CEH is going to be ahead of Mecole Hardman unless it's Damian Williams, or one of those two guys, or maybe both of them. But on any given Sunday, if Mecole Hardman's in your flex spot, I mean, that could be a huge week because we know he's got the speed and he's got the best quarterback in the league throwing him the ball. And I recently got him in like the 13th or 14th round in a startup as one of my bench players. So I love that value in Dynasty. And then I just put down some guys that are kind of off the radar right now. That's Mike Williams is going later than Mecole Hardman. I know Mike Williams isn't a sexy player to own. And to quickly call back to Anthony Miller, a thought that I had before, but I lost it in the moment. Just quickly on Anthony Miller, with the QB situation there, he could end up, even though he's talented, he could end up being that roster clogger type of guy if his career gets wasted by these bad QBs. And that could, to go back to Mike Williams, that could be happening to Mike Williams here with a quarterback change. Who knows who it's going to be throughout the season, Tyrod Taylor or Justin Herbert. But, he has a high touchdown upside, like John mentioned with Cooper Kupp. He's had 10 touchdowns in a season. He's had almost 1,000 yards in a season, although those were opposite seasons where that happened. I just think he's a good overall player. And in the 14th, 15th round of a dynasty startup, why not take a shot on Mike Williams, who killed it in college with Deshaun Watson throwing him the ball. So if he could get anything at quarterback, I think this guy could jump in ADP and be a sell candidate for you to make a little bit of profit for your dynasty team. And then my last one, go ahead.
I really hope you're right there. That's all I just want to say. I mean, I think John knows I've liked Mike Williams for some time. I think when we first started getting into this fantasy football, John, the first league I was in with you were challenging me in the first chat we were ever in. You might not remember this, but I posted something on the chat, and I was still learning market value. As long as I played fantasy football, I wasn't in depth in dynasty like John was, and I threw out Mike Williams, and he challenged me right away. You know, why do you have him there? Where do you have him against these guys? And at that time, for me, it was the eye test. I mean, he's a specimen. He's a talent. And so I've come down to earth on where he is market value wise, but I do still love the talent, Newt. So I hope you're right. And I hope Los Angeles has it right. And Herbert takes the next steps and could be that guy. And there's more talent than we've seen in Mike Williams. So fingers crossed.
I have 2 quick points on Mike Williams, and I'll keep it short. But one, yeah, Dan, I do remember that. And you sent me a trade offer, and I'm pretty sure I put you on blast in the chat, which typically I don't do. But Dan, I was like, I got to give you a hard time. And I had him as a big time sell candidate. I did not think that he was going to hit the levels that and the hype that people had for him and the expectations. But now, based on where he's going, just like things change, it's cyclical. I see him as a buy right now. In redraft, he's going as wide receiver 48. And again, at that point in the draft, he is offering such upside. And the other point, I don't understand what's going on here because Phillip Rivers goes to Indianapolis. Oh, T.Y. Hilton, he's not really going to do much because Phillip Rivers is garbage. Well, Rivers leaves Los Angeles, and now people are saying, oh, the quarterback situation is unknown. You just said Phillip Rivers was awful, but now it's unknown. So you can't have it both ways. And I think there's people, Dan, you like to say there's people that talk out of both sides of their mouth. If Phillip Rivers was no good for that team, you would like to think that Mike Williams' prospect and his production, we see an increase because I think you mentioned Newts. We talked about, who do we talk about with there? Oh, DK Metcalf and his catch percentage. Mike Williams, you would like to think that would increase with Rivers leaving, I think.
One point on that, JB, and I don't know where this hit me in the last 48 hours, but I was thinking exactly about these quarterback situations. And watching Phillip Rivers last year, it was painful to watch in Los Angeles. So I am optimistic that Williams might get a better situation. I just think Tyrod and Herbert are better for the situation. As painful as Phillip Rivers was to watch last year, I think he's at this point in his career, he's a system quarterback. And I think he is fortunate to have an incredible offensive line in Indianapolis that I think could hold that pass protection a little bit longer. And the Colts might milk one solid enough year out of Phillip Rivers to keep T.Y. Hilton productive and watch Michael Pittman maybe play kind of a Mike Williams role and Paris Campbell take a next step. So hopefully it's a better situation in Los Angeles. And the Colts could just, for 1 year, I think, get the best out of Rivers.
And real quick, you mentioned the offensive line. Obviously, that Colts line is very strong. And for some reason, I was looking stuff up earlier on PFF, and I was looking at, you can separate it whenever the quarterback is kept clean. And in 2019, Phillip Rivers, his adjusted completion percentage was top 12 whenever he was kept clean, because we know that Chargers line isn't the best. So yeah, I think we could still get a little something from Phillip Rivers, but I just think it's interesting. People, they want to say, well, the quarterback situation's unknown, but then the very next sentence they say Phillip Rivers is awful. Wouldn't you think that would make things better for Mike Williams and Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler in the passing game? We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
And real quick, I sent you or I'll tell it to you right here. I'm giving you a live trade offer right now, John, on this podcast in Heroes and Villains. Did you see it or no?
No, I haven't seen it. Let me
look it
up right now.
Calvin Ridley and Thanos 2021 second for DK Metcalf.
That's a good offer. I was going to say there's no chance on earth of getting a trade with JB on the spot, but I think you got at least enough to get him thinking.
And while he's thinking and looking at that, I'm going to just
I don't even have to think. Accepted.
Oh, live trade on the show.
There.
That's the first live trade on the show, too. We're setting records today on the Gem Drafter podcast.
But that's what we do on Dynasty Theory. We put our money where our mouth is. We don't sit there and just have takes for the sake of takes. I say I like Calvin Ridley. You sent me a very nice offer. I accepted. I'm not going to haggle. I'm not going to mess around here. I put my money where my mouth is. And I don't want to say that I made the championship game last year, and Thanos and I, we split.
Of course,
we chopped it up because Dan and Mitch, they always give me a hard time. Oh, John, you always want to chop. Yeah, because my teams never show up in week 16. So let me minimize that risk. But I think we're going to make some moves here in 2020. And Calvin Ridley, he's going to help me along the way. So I like that deal for both of us, Newts.
Great trade, boys. Nice timing, Newts, but great trade for both of you.
For sure. It just came to me. And my last guy for a dynasty trade target is a guy that has been talked about by some people, but I haven't mentioned him much. And it's the Baltimore wide receiver, Devin Duvernay. Doesn't have high draft capital, but behind Marquise Brown, or if God forbid, if something happens to Marquise Brown, there's a lot of questions at the wide receiver core in Baltimore. And I know it's a low passing volume offense. Obviously, they ran the ball, 500 and something times last year. But I could see Devin Duvernay, the athlete that he is and the baller that he was in college, breaking onto the scene here, and a great value in Dynasty. I think he's going after the two guys I have already mentioned for my Dynasty trade targets, and he's like a early 4th round rookie pick. And I know I had talked about Miles Boykin on my podcast earlier in the year as a target until they drafted Devin Duvernay and made things a little bit more questionable in Baltimore. So that's my last guy.
I have no issue with that. It is price. Why not?
That was a real interesting one based on the guys we talked about. It's definitely a deeper dive there, Newt, and I'll be really interested to watch how the Ravens' number 2 receivers plays out. I think Miles Boykin has a lot of pressure on him to not give up his job. I do not believe in Willie Snead. They let go of Seth Roberts. So I think if Boykin opens that window, Duvernay's going to hop in there. The question is, I think owners got to be patient. If you have him on your roster just because he doesn't produce in year 1, don't give up on him. If you truly believe in him and Boykin opens that door, by year 2, he could be a very productive slot receiver for that team. And I think Snead will ultimately be out of there.
Excellent. I had a lot of fun, guys. This was awesome. We ran long because you guys are just great to talk to. Me and John did like 2 hours on that Ghost First podcast for my Gem Drafter show here that never came out because we had some technical issues there. But just
whenever you have a Patreon and you can throw some behind the scenes clips out, you can spit that out despite the Skype sound quality. It's questionable.
It'll be so dated. I'll be like, what are they talking about? Why don't you guys tell them where to find you and anything you got going on with Dynasty Theory as far as giveaways or future guests if you want to hint some things?
I'll start us off, and then JB will close it out like Mariano Rivera there for us. New, Dynasty Theory podcast. You're going to hear me on there with Mitch and John, FF Coach Dan on Twitter, and then gearing up with Justin from the Father Son podcast for a DFS show. So keep your eye on that coming up as we get closer to the season. But thanks for having me on tonight, man. It was a pleasure meeting you in person, and I had a blast.
You as well.
Yeah, Newts, this was a lot of fun. And can we say, Dan, on the man's birthday, you've been saying Newt the entire episode. Newts. There's an S at the end. Newts.
I like to shorten things. It's my personal nickname for him. Cam Newton. It's all good. But
I'm just giving you a hard time.
I get Newt quite a bit.
Well, anyway, Newts with the S. We really appreciate this. Had a lot of fun. Like Dan said, at least once a week, you can check us out live on YouTube. It's just Dynasty Theory. And then on Twitter and Instagram, Dynasty Theory FF. And then I also write for Fantasy Pros. I pump out a few articles a month. But we're going to be finalizing our projections. Mitch and I, Dan, he's going to have his rankings as well as his dysfunction rankings that I know, despite us giving a hard time, it's something that people do pay attention to, especially within Dynasty. But yeah, we're active on Twitter. If you have any questions, you can find me on Twitter at the Bauer Club. And, we're always going to be available. This was a lot of fun, Newts.
Yeah, I totally agree. A lot of fun. And I think I've kind of swayed. I think I'm going to start targeting the hour and a half mark. Maybe that's my new thing, like how Rogan does the 3 hours and says, screw it. I'm going to be the hour and a half guy. Thanks so much for coming on, you guys. I had a great time, and hopefully I can have you back sometime soon if you guys aren't too busy interviewing all those bigwigs over at ESPN.
Appreciate it, man. Go party now, will you, though? It's your birthday. Enough of that.
Yeah, go start grilling here.
I will. Thanks so much, guys.
All right, see you, Newts. Thanks.
Thank you, Newts.